2 years. That's all it took to turn a woman's bracelet into a signal for a death charge. November 11th, 1918, 10:59 in the morning. The guns have been firing for 4 years. In 1 minute, the war ends. The armistice is signed. Hostilities cease at exactly 11 a.m. And every American soldier on the Meuse and Moselle sectors is terrified of one thing. Not the enemy, not a bullet, being the man who fires 1 second too late. Newspaper reports from the front described it exactly. Their eyes were glued to their wristwatches, for fear they might fire 1 shot after the stipulated time for the ceasefire. The last second of the war counted down on a wristwatch, the same object that 5 years earlier no self-respecting American man would be caught dead wearing. This is how that happened. For most of the 19th century, a watch on a wrist had exactly one meaning. It meant you were a woman. They were called wristlets, jeweled bracelets with tiny clock faces, designed to be decorative, not accurate, not serious. Men wore pocket watches, and this wasn't a preference. It was a social law. A pocket watch said, I am a serious person. I have serious things to do. As late as 1913, Macy's department store in New York was advertising wristwatches as a rare curiosity, something worth mentioning specifically, something unusual. By 1916, the stigma was so severe that theatre promoters felt the need to reassure audiences in writing that their male lead was not the kind of man who wore a wristwatch. August 25th, 1915. New York City, Grand Central Palace. The American National Retail Jewelers Association is holding its annual convention. $500,000 worth of jewelry on display. Dozens of detectives. And one very angry colonel. Colonel Warren had had enough. He stood up in front of the entire convention and made his position absolutely clear. It's the greatest lot of bosh to declare that wearing a wristwatch is a sign of effeminacy. The big, strong, manly men of the country are adopting the idea. And then he said this: Sissies do not wear wristwatches. They might like to, but the big, real men won't let them. Colonel Warren was simultaneously completely right and spectacularly wrong. Right that real men would wear them. Wrong about why. Because while he was speaking, 75% of the soldiers on the Western Front were already wearing wristwatches, not as a fashion statement, because they had no choice. France, September 30th, 1915. Frederick Palmer is an American war correspondent. He is standing at British headquarters on the Western Front, and he is about to witness something he has never seen before. He filed his dispatch on September 30th. It ran in newspapers across America 3 weeks later, to the headline, Wristwatches tick signal for British death charge. Palmer writes, quoting his original dispatch exactly, it was a striking thing. The situation was like a raised hand calling for silence, and that pause when the conductor of a great orchestra has his baton in the air before the music begins. A terrifying, tense silence hung over the British army. In the advanced trenches, every soldier kept his eyes on his officer, and every officer had his eyes on his wristwatch. The time for the charge was approaching. Word had been passed down the line that the dash was to begin at the exact minute appointed. Every wristwatch had been compared and regulated, so that all told the time to the second. And then the second hand swept around the dial. And at the exact fraction of a second, thousands of voices gave the command, forward. A woman's bracelet, synchronized to the exact second, had just sent thousands of men over the top. El Paso, Texas, August 1916. 85,000 soldiers are stationed on the Mexican border, and something remarkable is happening in the city's shops. In 60 days, 25,000 wristwatches had been sold in one city. Jewelers sold them, drugstores sold them, clothing stores sold them, cigar dealers sold them, and this detail is in the original newspaper. Fruit vendors were displaying them in their windows. The word military was now part of the product name. Not wristlet, not bracelet watch, military wristwatch. The stigma wasn't dying gradually. It was being replaced by war. And here is a detail that almost nobody knows. The Arizona Republican reported in 1920 that the US government saved significant sums during the war by a very simple decision. They stopped making watch pockets in military uniforms. If you had no pocket, you wore it on your wrist. Chicago, January 24th, 1919. The war is over. The soldiers are coming home, and a young attorney walks into a federal courtroom wearing a wristwatch. Federal Judge Landis noticed the watch, and he had one question. He looked at the attorney and asked, "Just what military service did you perform for your country, and when were you discharged?" The attorney blushed and admitted he had not served in the Army or Navy. Judge Landis issued his ruling. Hereafter, I do not want lawyers who have not been in the Army or Navy to wear wristwatches in my courtroom. Think about what this means. 6 years after Macy's called them a rare curiosity, 4 years after the Jewelers' Convention, the wristwatch had become a legally protected symbol of military service. A federal judge had made it official. When the soldiers came home, they kept their watches on. These were men who had timed artillery barrages, who had counted down the last seconds of the war. No one called their watch effeminate, because no one dared. By 1940, a watchmaker named Clarence Boo had been repairing watches for 30 years in Evansville, Indiana, averaging 10 a day, approaching 100,000 watches total. 90% of what he repaired were wristwatches. The heavy, serious pocket watch had nearly vanished from his bench. 6 a year, he said. That's what they used to call them. Turnips. And there was one detail the journalist noticed. Clarence Boo, the man who spent 30 years fixing wristwatches, wore a pocket watch himself. He didn't particularly care for wristwatches, even though 90% of his work was on them. The man who fixed the future still carried the past in his pocket. In 1913, Macy's called a wristwatch a rare curiosity, something unusual enough to advertise. That was the last time anyone would use that word. Today you put one on without thinking about it, without knowing that it came from the mud of the Argonne Forest, from the synchronized second hands of officers going over the top, from 25,000 watches sold in 60 days in El Paso, Texas. Every time you check your wrist, you're carrying a piece of a war that ended 100 years ago. The war didn't just change the world, it changed what a man looks like, and he wants to know what time it is